Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to the Center for Fiction for having me. It's really a privilege to introduce my novel tonight. And it's an absolute joy to be in conversation with Alice McDermott, who is one of my literary heroes. So we thought that I would start by reading a scene from my novel, and I'll set it up just a bit. The Five Wounds began as a short story that was included in my collection, Night at the Fiestas. And the story is set in the fictional small town of Las Penas, New Mexico, and it opens during Holy Week. Amadeo is an unemployed alcoholic, and he is a part of a small community of Catholic penitentes whose worship includes some physical penance. And he has been chosen to play the role of Jesus in the Good Friday procession, and he has thrown himself into the role, and he hopes that it will transform his whole life. But all of his plans are disrupted when his daughter, Angel, shows up unannounced and enormously pregnant and informs him that she's moving in with him. At the end of the short story, Amadeo asks for real nails to be used in the reenactment of the crucifixion. And in the last moments of the story, he truly sees his daughter and he recognizes his responsibility toward her. And it ends on this kind of epiphany. But I kept coming back to that epiphany, and I wondered, okay, so what happens next after he has this realization? Does he really change his life? And these were the questions that inspired the novel. So I will be reading from the scene that happens right after the crucifixion. In the crowded ER waiting room, Angel sits beside him in cold silence, flipping angrily through a ragged parenting magazine, while Amadeo cradles his hands in his lap, marveling at the bright stickiness of his own blood soaking the towels. The doctors are taking forever. He's been sitting under the fluorescent lights in this plastic chair bolted to the floor, leaning forward so as to protect his scourged back for nearly 2 hours. Hey, he tells a nurse rushing past in scrubs printed with Easter eggs. How long's it going to be? Because this is really serious. He indicates his hands, but the nurse regards him with only the barest tightening flicker around her mouth, then rushes on, consulting her clipboard. Most of these people don't even seem sick. Not a single other person is losing blood. Where are the gunshot wounds, the heart attacks, the massive head injuries? Where is the carnage? Would someone please show him a single emergency greater than his own that might explain this unconscionable weight? He is Jesus, for Christ's sake. Whoa, he tells Angel. I'm feeling really lightheaded. She doesn't even glance at him. Across from them, a woman scrolls through her phone. Her young daughter, 7, 8, swings her feet restlessly, and a rhinestone-studded flip-flop drops to the teal epoxy floor. With both hands, she grips a bag of cherry cough drops. Her eyes are wide and fixed on his bloody towel. Are you sick? He asks the girl as nicely as he can, trying to rein in his annoyance. The girl raises her eyes from the gore in his lap with some reluctance. Her hair is ratty. I might have foot and mouth disease, she says. The mother looks up warily from her phone. Maybe I could go before you then? Amadeo raises his swaddled hands. I'm bleeding out. We've been here 3 hours, the woman says, and she returns to her phone. You are not bleeding out, says Angel, louder and meaner than necessary. But what does she know? Angel is a high school dropout, not a doctor. People die all the time from slit wrists, and the palm is basically the wrist. He moves his chair and gasps when the bandage on his back shifts. After the second nail, the hermanos helped him right down and gave him water, offering their congratulations. Al Martinez had bandaged him up gently. Keep pressure here and here, he said. You did good, son. Still, the man is no professional, and Amadeo can already feel the medical tape coming unstuck. To Amadeo's surprise, Tio Tive didn't show any of the kindness of the others, didn't even seem proud. And the old man didn't call him an ambulance either, just got one of the hermanos who lives in Española to drop them at the hospital. Nail gun, Tio Tive warned. You got in the way of a nail gun. Anyway, says Angel, turning the page of her magazine, it would serve you right if you did bleed out. He looks at her. Hey, come on, what a thing to say. Where did that come from? All of a sudden, he remembers that today is Angel's birthday, 16. She didn't mention anything this morning. He wonders if she forgot, or if she wanted the day to be his. Listen, Angel, I'm sorry you had to be in the emergency room on your birthday. I apologize. Is that your problem? Is that what's bugging you, that you're not getting the attention? Listen, I wouldn't have asked you to come if it wasn't an emergency. I'm wounded. Angel says nothing. Thank God she'll have the baby soon, Amadeo thinks, because he's not sure how much more he can take of these moods. Did you see the whole thing? He asks in an undertone. He wishes he'd had her take pictures, but he reflects that wouldn't have been in the spirit of the occasion. Angel riffles through the magazine too fast to be reading anything. Amadeo watches the article titles as she flips past them. Oral fixation, take along snacks your child will love. Milking it, your toddler and lactose. I feel you, raising empathetic children. Amadeo taps this last article, and Angel pauses her frenetic page turning. Hey, that one looks good, he says. Wish I'd known about raising empathetic children. Angel gives him a shriveling, disgusted look. You got to be joking me. He turns away from her and looks instead at the television mounted in the corner. Cable news plays too loud. A cruise ship has lost power and is floating free in the Caribbean. The toilets have flooded and the king shrimp have gone off. Big deal, thinks Amadeo. So they get a longer cruise. So they eat Fritos. It's not like they're facing a medical situation. It's not like there's blood involved. Amadeo hurts much worse than after the cutting of the seos on Ash Wednesday, worse than after those lashes. Earlier, he seemed to have risen to some heightened space that pain didn't penetrate. He was cloaked in grace, he supposes. But now he really, truly hurts, and Angel is giving him neither the praise nor the sympathy that he deserves. The pain clusters in his palms, shimmering, ever-changing. He wants, suddenly, to put his daughter in her place. Don't you even got a boyfriend? Angel turns and looks at him like he's stupid. What do you think? Didn't your mom never teach you not to sleep around? All of the girls in my parenting class, not one of them has a guy that matters, she says. Not one. You think you mattered? You shouldn't have come, he says. You think you have a right to just barge into my house and make yourself at home. Angel's eyes widen, and then she narrows them. It's my grandmother's house. You don't have a house. She turns back to her magazine, resolute. At long last, the girl and her mother are called. Amadeo looks at them piteously, and the girl looks back with interest, but the mother gathers their things and walks away, refusing eye contact. Hey, he says, ready to reconcile. Why are you so mad at me? I did good today. Angel finally sets the magazine on her lap and turns to him. So, she says deliberately, tell me, what was that? You never said anything about actual nails. You never said anything about actually getting crucified. What good is that to anyone? Her words are like a slap. What's it to you, Angel? Her voice thickens and lowers. In 3 weeks I'm due. 3 fucking weeks. She swallows and turns away, and her eyes rest unseeing on the television. For a moment, Amadeo thinks Angel is going to cry. When she turns back, however, her eyes are dry, her face splotchy, gaze shuttered. Very quietly, so quietly he has to lean toward her to hear, Angel says, how are you going to hold the baby? Or didn't you even think of that? Thank you. Hey, Alice. Oh, you're still on mute.
There we go. Thank you so much for that reading. I was just thinking, what pleasure you must have gotten out of writing a line like, he's Jesus, for Christ's sake.
That was pretty fun.
Congratulations on this wonderful, wonderful novel and all the rightly deserved acclaim it's collecting. I thought maybe to begin, for those in the audience who might be confused because you just described 2 wounds, not 5. If you would just maybe just explain for readers what the title refers to, the 5 wounds.
So the five wounds are the title refers to the five wounds that Jesus suffered on the cross. So it's two nails in each hand, um, I think one through the feet, and a stick in the side. Um, yeah.
But
So
for Amadeo, it's the two that he receives in his hands.
yes, yeah, yeah. And then the idea of woundedness, of course, sort of
Right. I'm so
filters in.
fascinated as a matter of craft, I suppose. Uh, this idea, I remember reading the story. I vividly remember reading the story in the New Yorker. It seems so complete on its own. Was it a matter of the characters coming back to you? Was it simply, as you indicated, that so where are they now? What happened next after that moment? Um, what brings you to take something that seemed perfect in its in and of itself, that lovely, lovely short story, and to say, no, there's more, there's more. What was that like?
A few months after the story was published, my editor emailed and asked if I'd ever thought about extending it into a novel. And I wrote back and said, absolutely not. It's it's a short story, and I'm done with those characters. And then about 2 years later, I was looking at some stories that were in process, and they weren't really working, and I was trying to decide which one I was going to focus on. And I noticed that all three of them dealt with basically the same family dynamic, the same kinds of characters. I mean, they all had different names, and the situations were slightly different, but there was I in a flash, I sort of recognized Amadeo and Angel and Yolanda, and I thought, oh, wow, apparently I'm still interested in this story. So that I started to, that summer, I wrote and to see if I could extend it.
And was it that scene that you just read that how about just take the story into the next hour, literally, of what's conveyed to make it a novel, or was it that pulling out of characters who had not been fully developed yet?
It was both. I think I was really curious about Angel. Yolanda's not on the page at all in the short story, um, but I I think I didn't entirely trust the epiphany. I did for the moment that the story ends on. I mean, I believe that Amadeo has this understanding about his responsibility and where possibility for change actually is located in that moment. But um, I think I at least need lots of epiphanies in order to actually change my life. And I think it's hard to make real changes, and I just wasn't sure that that was enough for Amadeo.
Uh-huh. There's a wonderful haunting character that I remembered so vividly when I picked up the novel, in the short story, Manuel Garcia, who is the guy who's already done the nails. And in the story, he's sort of an ancient mariner. He haunts the story. He haunts Amadeo. He threatens Angel in some way. He's a wonderful. He's a specter. He's something of the past. He's bitter. He had that epiphany, and then seems stuck with it in the story. So there's a terrible sadness, and and he's not there. You had to, what was that decision like to say? He's rumored in the novel. There's an indication that he has been heard of, but he drops out as a character. Was that painful, taking
Well,
him out?
you know, the draft I submitted to my editor just over a year ago was about 150 pages longer, and there was a storyline. Manuel was in
Hmm.
the story for quite a while. Um, and it just didn't work. He wasn't as necessary to the novel, and that storyline wasn't pulling its weight, and
Mm,
it was tricky for me to understand that I could break the story. I think because the story had been published, it was
sure.
in my collection, and it did have this, once something is in print, it takes on this sort of permanence. And um, I, I didn't know that I was allowed to break it open and take what I needed. And once I understood that, then I was able to streamline the novel. I mean, it's still over 400 pages, so it's not that streamlined.
And did you sort of tell Manuel, well, you had your life in the short story, so sorry, you're shown the door in the novel.
It's funny, the story and the novel, it's the same characters, but they sort of it's sort of these parallel universes,
Mhm.
and so both of those realities kind of exist for me. But I think Manuel's still out there wandering around menacing people.
He feels like it. Yeah. You cannot get rid of Manuel.
No.
And what about Yolanda? Because as you say, I mean, I think she's mentioned in the story that she's gone, but she's off stage. She remains off stage. She's in Las Vegas. Uh, what was it like? Did you have a sense that here's a character I need to bring on stage? Or was it again just the next logical thing to happen in time as far as the novel goes?
Well, she exerts a real, even off stage, she exerts a pressure on the story. Um, she and Amadeo have this really codependent relationship. He
Mhm.
lives in her house. She supports him completely. He goes to her for comfort when he's feeling bad about himself, and so it was clear to me that any any meaningful change in Amadeo was going to require a change in that relationship.
So she had to have, but she has her own. It's not. She's very much. You're right. It's very codependent, and she makes his life possible. She's what every alcoholic needs, someone who makes life possible so that he's free to drink and do all his impossibly inappropriate things. But she has her own arc, as we like to say in workshops. Um, was that something you needed to discover, or was that sort of a buzzing potential that felt it needed a novel, not just a far off mention in a short story?
I was really interested in Yolanda. I was interested in what made her so tolerant of Amadeo's bad behavior, and yeah, she's I think she really tries to be a good person, and she loves her family, and she pours everything into them. And she discovers early on that she's dying. I mean, it's not really a spoiler because it's early in the novel, and she has to make some different decisions about her life in the last months that she has. So yeah, I was interested in how she got there, and
Mhm.
yeah,
And then in the last months of her life, she's also uh, giving harbor and shelter to her granddaughter, Angel, who's expecting her first child at, at 16 as of that Good Friday.
yeah. I mean, Angel was probably the most fun character to write. She's funny and vivacious, and she really sees the adults around her,
Mhm.
and and she passes judgment, and she makes demands on them. Um, and it was through Angel that I began to get a broader sense of the community. It was through her participation in this teen parenting program. Um, and I found that what happened in the classroom was really important to her. Her world is broadening.
Well, she's in a Smart Starts, always with an exclamation point, which is a program for pregnant teen girls to get their GEDs, and that's a wonderful world that you just capture so beautifully. All the girls are they're troubled, they're smart, they're supportive of each other, they're lonely, they're selfish, they're needy. You do that so beautifully. That I can see how much fun that must have been, but also sort of heartbreaking to deal with characters like that.
Yes, I worked as a grant writer in for a nonprofit in Tucson that was working to improve the quality of early childhood care and education across the city, um, and especially for children who were underserved. And one, I did a site visit to a teen parent program, and I was so struck by these girls, by how there was so much bluster there, and they were so young, and they were also really poised and really serious about making good choices for themselves and their children. I found it incredibly moving. And my mother is a therapist, and she'd had groups for teen parents. And I remember reading the curriculum when I was a teenager, and um, just being in awe of how much responsibility kids my age um, had for these whole lives.
And is there wonder you strike a wonderful balance they remain young, they remain childish in some ways, but you also get a marvelous sense of the strength that they have, the inner resources that these girls who seem to have very few outer resources are able to call up. You also I think you have some of the best babies in contemporary fiction. You so wonderfully, Angel's baby Connor, but all the mothers with their babies, a wonderful way of making the babies both genetic and you know, they look like their mothers. They're real. They do all the things that babies do, and yet they have marvelous personalities. I love the way you did that. The babies really are characters, not just dolls being carried around and made to cry out every once in a while. That's so beautifully done. One of the things that happens with Angel, sort of her reckoning, is she falls in love with one of the other mothers, Lizette, and learns something about herself. And in some ways, Lizette is a mirror image of Amadeo in a lot of ways. She's selfish. He's selfish. She's confused. She doesn't know how to bring people close to her, and yet she needs people close to her. You even have that wonderful parallel. She's a cutter, but Amadeo has also done in his self-flagellation, is a cutter. And Angel is sort of balanced between these two, her love for her troubled father and then her love for this troubled girl. Did you ever, and maybe I felt the pull of this more for Amadeo because he fails so often. Did you ever want to cut a break for either one of those characters? There are a couple of places where, my heart ached. I wanted Lizette to move in. to Yolanda's house. I wanted Amadeo's little job. He has a dream of repairing windshields. I wanted it to work. um, did you ever feel like sort of the cruel and indifferent God that these two characters just can't get a break?
It's so funny, Alice, that you draw that parallel between them because I didn't see that until
Hmm.
now. And yeah, now that you point it out, I absolutely see the parallels. I think one major difference between Lizette and Amadeo is that Amadeo's a grown up. Lizette is
Mhm.
still just a kid, and she's been really failed by the people, the adults around her you know, who are supposed to be caring for her. Um, as far as giving them a break, I thought about having Lizette move in with the family, and um, I I somehow didn't believe it. I thought that that would be for me and more than growing out of the characters. Um, Although, I do have hope for them. I mean,
Mhm.
I have a lot of hope for both of them. I think,
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that the novel brings us to that in many ways. Um, there's one sort of, let's put on our Catholic novelist hats, um, but for me, and it's something that has stayed with me the more and more thinking about the novel. Uh, and again, please read. This is marvelous, marvelous work. There's a there's a great irony I felt at the center of the story, the multiple stories, the ongoing stories of this family. Um, and that is, in so many ways, um, Catholicism doesn't exist in their lives. It's not there. Um, the church is not there.
mm-hmm.
Yolanda goes into the cathedral, but she doesn't even go to pray. When she's given this terrible diagnosis, as you say early on, so we're not giving anything away. Um, she doesn't pray. She doesn't think about her faith at all with that diagnosis. She gets her hair cut and she rents a cool car. Um, Easter comes, but nobody talks about the Easter story. Uh, I guess I think about, the five wounds were, indications of Jesus' death on the cross, but they were also something the Gospels say anyway, I think it's Luke, that Jesus, the resurrected Christ, used to prove both his suffering and his resurrection. He tells the apostles when he appears to them after Easter, um, he asks them to put their hands in his wounds to prove that he died and has lived. And that part of faith does not exist for these characters. There's no talk of, right, when Yolanda does die, she's gone. The characters say she's gone. So we don't have the ritual church. Yes, we have um, the harrowing experience of Good Friday, but the characters don't seem to have any access to Easter Sunday or any, they're getting nothing from the church. It's a void. And I think that's so interesting. And absolutely just so fascinating how much the church, you can't even say it's failed them. Nobody talks about the abuse crisis or why they left or even why, it's just not there. Um, is that where you see where the Catholic Church has pretty much disappeared, except for a few cultural remnants from these generations?
Gosh, I don't think I can really say that the church has disappeared, but I do think it's true. I think, for Yolanda, it's Catholicism is something she takes for granted, and also she doesn't think much about at all. I think, Teotihuacan is a believer and it matters to him. Amadeo is grappling with the story as much as he can, but he is focused on just the suffering,
Mhm.
and yeah, Angel thinks about God, and but again, she's not a churchgoer. She's not practicing. I think she sort of takes for granted that there's a God, but she doesn't think about it over much. It's true. Um,
Well, she has Brianna, another wonderful character who teaches in Smart Starts, and who at the beginning of the novel, Angel just so admires and loves. Um, and in some ways, it seemed to me Brianna is kind of a secular nun. She's a virgin at the beginning of a 25-year-old virgin. She wears kind of dowdy clothes to inappropriate for the weather. Uh, and Angel even asked her to be godmother to Connor, Angel's child. But Brianna does say she's an agnostic. She doesn't have a faith tradition. Um, and when she refuses to be the godmother because it would not be appropriate, and she had been asked by some of the other girls, Angel doesn't look for a substitute. Or, again, it seems that the rituals of the church, except for this awful, bloody reenactment that the novel so beautifully opens with, um, don't seem to offer peace. They're mass funerals,
mhm.
last rites. Nobody calls a priest, when Yolanda is dying. It just seems like the church, for all the um, maybe macho gatherings that like Teotihuacan, it just seems it has no, it gives no ballast. It has no life in the lives of these characters. Um, which feels like it feels like a little bit of an indictment. That's why I wondered if that may be something you wanted to point out, a real failure to be relevant to the lives of these characters.
Well, I don't think it's, answering a lot of the needs of these characters. I mean, Angel's needs are immediate, they are urgent, and they are material. I mean, she needs to be able to make a life for this new baby. She needs to make it through each day. And it's true, it's Brianna who seems to offer her some hope, and Brianna who teaches her about nurturing discipline and um, early literacy. Um, but it's true. It's true. They Yolanda urges Amadeo to engage with this tradition, but she herself is not terribly engaged. She's outside of it. She sees it as a hopeful thing for him, for her son.
Yeah, in some ways she sees it as a good alternative to doing drugs. I think she describes it sort of as a little spot of hope where the men gather in the Morado, At least he has that. It's kind of like, I don't believe in the church, but Knights of Columbus is okay because it gives the men something to do. But it's not personal for her. It's not, there's not a personal faith for her that somehow stands up against uh, this terrible diagnosis that she's gotten. Um,
It's true. I mean, she looks, when she's facing down death, she's really, she starts looking into her own past and her own, um, who she's been in the past, um, and that's where her attentions lie, and that's the sort of thing that she grapples with.
yeah, and in some ways, because there's a beautiful scene, and it comes back to her in her last days. She's out with the office crowd, and a very ugly man, um, a stranger, asks her to dance. And she's pretty much getting to the point where this is the end of her active life before she begins to really feel the effects of her brain tumor. And it's a beautiful, beautiful moment, as it's narrated and then as she recalls it. And it seems that all the characters, they don't look for redemption from their faith, from the rituals of their faith, but they look to one another. There seems to be tremendous faith in the body, in the sensual. I think Yolanda even sort of thinks about that. Her boyfriend, who she abandons in Las Vegas at the end, at the beginning of the novel, does come back to see her. And she has this moment of maybe if they just went into the bedroom together, it would be a kind of redemption. There, something would be restored. Um, Amadeo, even Brianna, everyone seems to believe that something in the physical communion between two people, that's where restoration, some kind of resurrection, if you will, is available. Um, do you see that? I mean, would you say that's where their hope lies in that?
I think, yeah, to varying extents. I mean, Yolanda in the end doesn't go into the bedroom with Cal, because she understands that actually, no, it won't. It won't turn back time, and actually, it would be unfair to Cal because
Mhm.
she's not in love with him, and that she might take comfort from him, but um, she decides that it wouldn't be the right thing to do. Um, but absolutely, I think the characters do find, where redemption happens. It's in each other. It's in recognizing their responsibilities to the other people in their lives. It's in recognizing that, Amadeo is so caught up in his own story. He's the star of his own story. Just as he thinks of himself as the star of the passion, um, and I mean, part of his arc is understanding that everyone around him has stories too,
Mhm.
and he has to see that and see his responsibility toward his daughter.
So are you hopeful for him, with all his plans that go awry and his resolutions to be better, and then he doesn't? But at the end of the novel, he's edging towards something. I don't want to suggest that we need a sequel. So, um,
There won't be a sequel. Um, I, I am. I am hopeful for him. Absolutely. I think he does get there. And yeah, I'm hopeful for all of the characters. I think, in literary fiction, as we say in workshop, is about character change. It's about, Elizabeth Bowen says that, you know, a character cannot, in a scene, a character cannot be the same at the end of the scene as they were at the beginning. She said it more elegantly than that. But, you know, the very fact that characters can change, that we can change, I think is profoundly hopeful. So, yeah, I do have hope for all of them.
Good. I do too. I want them to do better.
I think they can because they want to.
We have a lot of questions from the audience, so I thought I would pop on and we could get right to them. Pamela says, it's very brave to imagine a post-crucifixion scene, and it's funny. Did you feel that there had to be humor in it for it to be plausible and bearable?
It's nice to see you, Pamela, in the chat. Thanks for coming. I think for me, humor is a part of everything. I mean, the most horrible moments of my life have always there's always been humor. I mean, I can't always recognize it in the moment, but the absurdity is always there, and I'm attracted to writing that has some that is can be in both spaces, the tragic and the comic. Yeah, and I do think it's there is something a little bit funny about a guy thinking he can be Jesus. It is absurd. But I also don't want to laugh at Amadeo. I think his struggles are really, really real and important. And he feels, he feels real pain. I'm also I'm attracted to characters who are funny. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Karen says, I'm curious to hear more about the setting of Las Peñas, New Mexico, and what drew you to write about that particular place.
So Las Peñas is a fictional town. It's based loosely on some of the towns where my grandparents grew up. These little villages in New Mexico that, when my grandparents were children, were really thriving and, populated. And now absolutely people still live there, but they're dying villages in some ways. Well, I don't want to say dying because they people do live there and they are important, but they're not these vibrant communities that they once were. And I'm very, very close to my grandparents and great aunt, and I've spent a lot of time with them driving around New Mexico and going back to visit the villages where they grew up. And on my last trip with my grandmother to her birthplace, I just noticed real sadness. She didn't want to go back after that. She said she was done, and I think there was real sadness. She liked revisiting those places, and she liked my interest in them. She liked telling stories about it, but I think there is something about I just kept wondering what it would be like to still be living in a village where so much of that history and that liveliness is behind it.
Thank you. What was the hardest part about writing this novel?
The hardest part about writing this novel, writing a novel was really hard for me. It's my first novel. I think it was hard in the very beginning. Amadeo's character was tricky for me because I judged him, and I had to put some of that judgment aside and truly, when I was in his point of view, I had to be in his point of view, and that was uncomfortable. Um, so I think that was tricky. I felt impatient with him. Um, Alcoholism is a really difficult illness, and yeah, it wasn't always easy to be in his point of view.
Let's see. John says, I love your story, The Guest House, and it felt like there are character echoes for me in this novel. I was wondering if you are interested in the tangled nature of family that doesn't act like it.
I am. I mean, I love writing about families. I found after my story collection came out, I realized that I had no romantic relationships in the whole collection, and I thought, gosh, that's kind of sad. And so one of the tasks I gave myself in this novel was to actually write about romantic love, and I. But I think we all have obsessions as writers, and one of my obsessions is absolutely, families. How and how adult children um, revisit their childhoods, and how the ways that people within a family can wound each other and love each other and sustain each other.
Beautiful. Let's see. This is somebody who knows you. Hey, Kirsten, or maybe not. I'm a huge fan, and it's been so lovely to hear you talk this evening. I wanted to know, your writing to me seems so deeply rooted in place that I was almost surprised to hear that you're in New Jersey now. Do you consider yourself to be a New Mexican or a Southwestern writer? And do you think that it will continue to be a place you visit in your writing in the future?
I too am surprised to find myself in New Jersey. um, I I do consider myself. I'm a Southwestern girl, and New Mexico absolutely still has a pull on me. It's the landscape, the history, all really fuels my imagination. My family has a really long history in New Mexico, and like I said, I'm really close to the elders in my family, and so their stories have always been a part of my understanding of the place and of myself. Um, but we left when I was a kid, and moved around a lot. So, um, my grandmother's house became that was home. That was the consistent home through all of those childhood moves, and so, and I always felt longing to return, and that longing has never gone away. So, yeah,
And your
I love
characters love the place. The characters in this novel have a deep love for the place. There are bleak landscapes occasionally, and they feel lost in it. But you can also see that they love the place. They belong there.
Yeah, I think they do belong there. Yeah, that the soil is in them, the air is in them. But I think they also they dream about leaving too, and at points. They keep um, thinking of Oregon as this really exotic place where it's green.
Let's see. This is from Jane Hamilton. Kirstin, I think of Jubilee as one of your great achievements. You have so many great achievements. How do you feel about that story in the here and now?
Hi, Jane. what do I think about Jubilee? I don't think about Jubilee all that much. I mean, if I read from it, I do, and I have a lot of affection still for Andrea, and but I think my brain space is mostly focused on the projects that I'm in the thick of. That's because I'm always trying to see how I can make the stories work, and that's mostly what I think about. But thank you for saying that about Jubilee.
See, can you talk about your writing influences? Do you turn to different kinds of fiction for different kinds of inspiration? Examples, theme, beautiful sentences, character, dialogue?
Absolutely. I read really widely. I don't, I like a thriller. I like, memoir, nonfiction. I and I learn a lot from everything I read. I mean, I remember reading the Da Vinci Code. I think I was in college, and I mean, I hope I don't hurt anyone's feelings or Dan Brown's feelings, but it's not a great novel. The writing's not amazing. But I remember I was just ravenous, and he has these really short chapters, and it's so propulsive, and I couldn't stop reading it. And I thought, oh wow, these short chapters work, And so I find that I'm always learning from everything. Maybe not everything, but from what I read. And different influences. When I first started the story that became the Five Wounds, I was thinking a lot about Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory. I was thinking of Flannery O'Connor's Parker's Back. Those stories were really present with me. Yeah.
Thank you. This question I want to open up to both of you. How has the pandemic impacted your writing and your reading life?
Alice, do you want to start?
Oh my goodness. Early on, when things were crazy a year ago, I found I couldn't read anything of any length. I think the first time in my life I really found myself distracted by fiction, not in a good way. So but I found poetry and actually reading plays to be wonderfully comforting, and something I could focus on and could go to as an escape. As this new life has sort of settled in and become more the life that we seem to be living. Fortunately, thank goodness, a little bit was making, I made myself go back and read Brothers Karamazov just just to make sure I could still read a good, wonderful long novel like The Five Wounds. So that's dissipated itself. But for a long time, everything sounded like too much nonsense. I wanted the precision of poetry and the precision of characters speaking to each other on the stage, all the other prose stripped away. And then there may be that may stay with me in ways I haven't foreseen yet. What about you?
Gosh, I feel like my brain broke last spring. I could not concentrate on anything for a long time, and that had never happened to me. I've always been able to count on books, and I get such pleasure out of reading. And I'd read a paragraph, and I wasn't engaging with it. But I also found that poetry was my way back into reading. It was, yeah. And, now I'm back into reading novels and loving it again. I just finished someone, and God, that book is so gorgeous. Yeah.
And one more quick question, Alice. Would you tell us a little bit about what about the baby that's coming soon?
Yes. uh, this is a collection I have out, something I swore I would never do. And that's just putting together mostly lectures that I had delivered over the years, mostly to writers and aspiring writers. And usually most of these, not all of them, most of them were delivered at universities. Many of them were delivered at the Sewanee Writers Conference in the summer. And usually I would write on assignment just to talk about some aspect of craft, deliver the lecture, and then throw them in a drawer and never look at them again. And I kept putting off my editor, who was saying, "What are you doing with these?" for years, by saying, "When I retire from teaching, I'll give you the collection." Well, I retired from teaching, um, and now the collection is coming out. It's you know how it is when you're a fiction writer at heart. Anything that's not fiction feels a little you're a little embarrassed by. It's too much about other things. I always thought as a, well, not even as a young writer, probably up until I put this collection together, that I didn't want to see a fiction writer I loved coming out with essays about writing, because why are you doing that? You should be writing your novels. So I have a split personality as far as this collection goes.
Gosh, but as a reader of yours, I want to read those essays and learn how you do it.
Thank you. I hope so. Well, it's if they lead to some fun conversations in writing workshops, then I'll be pleased.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. This is the gorgeous novel we've been talking about, The Five Wounds. Please buy many copies of it now, preferably from the Center for Fiction's bookstore. Put a link in the chat again. Congratulations again, Kirstin. Alice, thank you so much for joining us tonight too. And thanks to our audience, of course. We hope to see you again very soon, and a good evening to all of you.
Thank you so much. This was such a joy.
Thank you.